Welcome back to the Unfiltered Political Lens Podcast. Today we're going to get right into it. We will be speaking of eroding trust in the federal and local law enforcement and conflicts and how the jurisdictional battles shape the justice and transparency and public perception within America. In today's episode of the Unfiltered Political Lens, we're going even deeper into a conversation that sits at the core of how justice is understood in America, but rarely gets fully explained. When major investigations unfold, the public is often presented with updates, press conferences, and headlines that suggest a coordinated effort between the agencies. But beneath that surface, there are layers of complexity, jurisdictional boundaries, institutional priorities, cultural differences, and communication gaps that can create real friction between local law enforcement and the federal authorities. And when that friction becomes visible, it doesn't just impact the case, it impacts how people perceive the entire system. Tonight we're expanding this discovery even further, breaking down not just how these conflicts happen, but why they persist, how they evolve over time, and what they ultimately mean for public trust in the justice system. What happens when the institutions tasked with delivering justice don't fully move in sync? And what does that mean for a public trying to interpret events in real time? Across the United States, the relationships between our local law enforcement and federal agencies, like the Federal Bureau of Investigations, is built on a foundation of cooperation, but layered with tension that can surface under pressure on paper. These agencies are aligned in mission. Excuse me. In reality, they operate within entirely different frameworks and different chains of command, different expectations, and different forms of accountability. And when those differences intersect during a high profile case, the result is not always seamless coordination, but a complex balancing act that can shape both outcomes and perceptions. At the same time, at the local level, law enforcement is inseparable from the community it serves. Sheriffs are often elected, meaning that their leadership is directly tied to the public's confidence. The police department's functions within the political and social climate of their jurisdictions, where relationships, history, and local dynamics all play a role in how investigations are conducted. When a serious crime occurs, the pressures is immediate and it's deeply personal. It's not just about solving the case, it's about maintaining the order, preserving the credibility, and demonstrating that the system is capable of responding effectively. Every decision carries weight not just legally but socially. When a federal agency enters the picture, the structure shifts. Operating under the authority of the United States Department of Justice, federal investigations bring a broader scope and a different set of profiles. Their perspective is not limited to just one community or even one state. They are trained to look for the patterns and connections and implications that extend beyond their local boundaries. They bring resources that can significantly enhance an investigation, advance forensic capabilities and national databases, and specialized expertise. But with those resources comes a shift in influence, and that shift can create tension when roles and responsibilities are not clearly defined or mutually agreed upon. This tension often manifests in subtle but impactful ways. It may begin with differences in the investigation strategy, the local agencies focusing on immediate leads within the community, while federal agents look for a broader connections. It may appear in how evidence is handled and how interviews are connected or how the priorities are set. These differences are not inherently problematic, but without strong coordination, they can lead to fragmentation. Fragmentation is one of the greatest risks. I'm sorry. Information is the lifeblood of any case. In today's environment, that information is vast and multifaceted. Digital records, surveillance footage, and forensic data, witness statements, as well as many more. Ideally, all of this would be integrated into a cohesive system where every piece contributes to the larger picture. But when multiple agencies are involved, that integration is not always seamless. Systems may not align, and the protocols may differ, and communications may lag. These gaps create what are often referred to as information silos, pockets of data that exist within the agency but are not fully shared with others. The consequences of these silos can be significant, delaying progress or causing critical connections to be missed. Communications with the public adds another layer of complexity. When the agencies are aligned, messaging tends to be clear and consistent. But when there is internal tension, that clarity can break down. Statements may differ in tone or detail. Timelines may shift and updates may become less frequent. For the public, this inconsistency can be difficult to interpret. Without the visibility into the internal dynamics, it can appear as confusion or even intentional withholding of information. In a time where transparency is expected, any deviation from that expectation can quickly lead to skepticism. And the role of the media in the process cannot be overstated. Coverage shapes the perception, and the perception shapes trust. When local agencies lead, the narrative often feels more immediate and accessible. When federal agencies take a more prominent role, communications may become more controlled. This is often done to protect the integrity of the investigation, but it can also create a gap in the information flow. That gap is often filled by speculation, analysis, and sometimes misinformation, especially in the age of social media, where the information spreads rapidly and narratives can form before all the facts are known. As we expand this conversation, it becomes clear that the conflict between federal and local law enforcement is not just optional, it is deeply cultural. Local agencies often define themselves by their connection to the community, their responsiveness, and their familiarity with local dynamics. Federal agencies often emphasize standardization, specialization, and broader investigative lens. These cultural identities shape how each group approaches a case. When they align, they can create a powerful synergy. When they don't, they can create friction that impacts both the process and the outcome. Resources and disparities further complicate this relationship. Federal agencies have the access to funding and technology that make local departments do not have. This can create a dynamic where local agencies depend on federal support for certain aspects of an investigation. While that support is valuable, it can also shift the balance of influence. Questions about leadership, control, and recognition can emerge, particularly in high profile cases where the public's visibility is high. Excuse me. Accountability is another key factor. Local officials are often directly accountable to their communities, creating a level of immediacy in how the decisions are perceived and responded to. The federal agencies operate within a national framework where the accountability is structured differently. Now, this difference can create a perception gap where the actions taken at the federal level feel more distant or less transparent to the public. Technology continues to amplify these dynamics as investigations rely more heavily on the digital tools, and the question of access and control becomes increasingly important. Federal agencies often lead in technological capabilities, but that leadership comes with questions about how the data is shared, who controls it, and how it is used. These questions are not just technical, they are central to the public's trust. The legal frameworks add yet another layer. Jurisdiction determines who has authority, but that authority is not always straightforward. The cases can evolve, crossing boundaries that shift. Uh, it can shift them from local to federal oversight. And these transitions can introduce the new processes, the new timelines, and the new priorities. For the public, these changes can be difficult to follow, creating a sense of uncertainty. But the human element ties all this together, and investigators are individuals making the decisions under pressure, influenced by the experience and instinct and the information available to them. When different agencies bring different perspectives, those perspectives can either complement each other or create conflict. The outcome depends on the communication, the collaboration, and the ability to adapt. For victims and their families, these dynamics are deeply personal. They are not concerned with jurisdictional boundaries or institutional structures. They are seeking answers, closure, and justice when agencies appear misaligned. It can add to the emotional strain and create a sense of frustration. The public's perception, shaped by constant access to information, plays a central role in how the situations are understood. People are not just observers, they are participants in the conversation. They analyze, question, and share the information in real time when official narratives are incomplete or inconsistent. Alternative interpretations emerge. Some are grounded in valid concerns and others in speculation, but all contribute to the broader narrative. This creates a cycle where perception influences communication and communication influences perception. When the trust is fragile, even accurate information can be met with doubt. Rebuilding that trust requires more than outcomes. It requires a commitment to transparency, consistency, and visual collaboration. Efforts to improve the coordination are ongoing. Joint task forces, shared systems, and interagency training programs are all steps toward reducing friction. These initiatives aim to create a more unified approach, but their effectiveness depends on execution and cooperation. This issue reflects a broader truth about the justice system. It is a complex, multifaceted, and constantly evolving. It is not defined by a single agency, but by the interactions of many. When those interactions are aligned, the system works. When they are not, the gaps become visible. And in those gaps, trust is either strengthened or eroded. The challenge moving forward is not just to improve how investigations are conducted, but to improve how they are understood. Because at the end of the day, justice is not just about what happens, it's about whether people believe and how it happens. Please make sure to like, share, and subscribe. And I want to thank you once again for tuning in to another episode of the Unfiltered Political Lens Podcast. We look forward to bringing you along in the next episode. Peace.